Good morning. It is a privilege to speak to the coalition today. I am so delighted that the coalition has become so large and so influential, and I hope that it continues along that trajectory for a reason we'll get into this morning. I am here at the invitation of Bruce Beriano. He's the one who reached out to me many months ago, and I, despite knowing Bruce, said yes. So it's really his fault, but it's nonetheless very much an opportunity. I thank Bruce and everyone else who made this possible. My job today, I feel, is to be somewhat provocative. Please feel free at any moment during this presentation to argue with me, suggest that my analysis is incorrect. Of course, also feel free to say that I'm right on point, incorrect as well, that's okay. But the goal is to provoke discussion. As I understand it, your morning goes from 9 to 12. My session is supposed to last until roughly 10:30, and much of that will be discussion. Please feel free to interject at any moment as I'm going through these slides. This is meant to be a discussion. And again, I have purposely tried to be provocative, but also accurate and data-driven, but to sort of stimulate an economy and talk about some themes that I observed in Maryland as it relates to rural communities. I've entitled today's presentations, "The Contributions of Rural Maryland to Our Shared Quality of Life, a Story of Misunderstanding and Neglect." And I will talk about sort of the importance of rural Maryland in terms of helping to diversify this economy and to make it stronger and also less dependent upon the federal government. I mean, that was one of the key aspects to diversification. Let me begin by talking about notions of comparative advantage. So one of the great things about Maryland is we have 24 jurisdictions, and by and large, they are all unique. Yes, we have Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Howard County, Anne Arundel County, the more urban jurisdictions, and they are also the more populous jurisdictions. Many of those jurisdictions are heavily flavored by federal government activities as the principal economic driver. But we're fortunate also to have rural communities where the federal government influences, at least sometimes, St. Mary's County would be an exception to this, is sometimes less influential, the federal government influence is less prominent, but also there's other opportunities for economic growth beyond adding service sector jobs and those kinds of things. And so what am I getting at? What rural communities supply that urban, suburban communities cannot. Open space. This is the second most urbanized state in the country. Number one, New Jersey. And that's measured by the proportion of people who live in the metropolitan area. So we are heavily urbanized. That actually makes the rural economies that much more important from an economic diversification standpoint. Agricultural output, something I'll touch upon today. Peace, quiet, serenity, an idyllic form of retirement. It's fine if somebody wants to retire to the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Baltimore. We're all different and that's perfectly fine. But there are others of us who aspire to something a bit different. Myself, I'm thinking now about retirement in maybe a couple of decades. And I will, looking at Chestertown and so on and so forth, sort of a different form, a different kind of potential retirement. Abundant natural resources. I'll spend a lot of time talking about natural resources. An export base, agriculture, industry, raw materials, a different form of tourism, a refuge from urban life. So the Inner Harbor is fabulous. But there's other forms of tourism, and of course visitation stimulates economic activity, economic growth. And by the way, communities that are typically communities of choice often have strong tourism sectors. So communities that are great for visitors are often great places to live as well. And I'll talk about this as I go through the presentation. And then finally, small, vibrant towns, e.g. Cambridge, Oakland, Easton, Berlin, but many others, dozens across our fantastic state, the best state in the country. And so we'll talk about all of these kinds of things. Are there other things that you could think of that rural communities can supply that urban communities can? I'm sure you could come up with a much lengthier laundry list. But these are the categories on which I'll focus this morning, given my available time. One of the things that is presumed out there because of the dynamics in Maryland is that most of the economic growth, the fastest economic growth, is in urban types of contexts. As it turns out, if you look at global economic data and you look at national economic data, typically what we observe in the world is that the fastest growing economies are not urban in their orientation. In fact, they are rural in their orientation. Marylanders may not appreciate this because of the experience in Maryland, where much of the growth has been outside the rural communities and inside the urban communities. Here I'm showing you a list of the fastest growing and slowest growing countries in the world, just to begin down this theme. Obviously, this discussion begins broadly, but believe me, I'm going to take it down very quickly to your communities. But let me just begin. These are the 20 fastest growing economies in the world. These are the 20 slowest growing economies in the world. And these data come from the International Monetary Fund, and these are forecasts for 2013. Now, as an aside, we're marching for the holiday season. Some of you take vacations in December, and I don't know if you've figured out where it is you want to head for the holidays or during summer vacation, but might I recommend to you a sojourn to the fastest growing economy in the world to see what 24.7% growth looks like. A vacation to South Sudan might be just what you need. Now, I'm not quite sure that there's enough time. Now, many people will say, Anirban, been there, done that. There's a lot of options here. I got Rwanda here for you. Here's Libya at number 186, as there's nothing quite like a moonlight stroll in Benghazi. In any case, notice from a regional perspective where the growth is. Africa, 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 Africa. And if it's not Africa, it's often Central Asia, Central Asia, Central Asia. These are not urban hotspots in the world. Name me one city in Central Asia. Exactly. Exactly. Now you can name some African cities, obviously, Lagos and Nairobi and so on and so forth. But by and large, the countries that are growing are not home to those cities. South Sudan, Sierra Leone. Why is this happening? Because of natural resource exploitation and because of agriculture. So as an example, the folks in Sierra Leone are among the major producers in the world of bauxite, which is an input into aluminum. The folks in Zambia are the 8th largest producer in the world of copper. They're taking advantage of their natural resources. Also the Tanzanians, the Ghanaians also produce bauxite, so on and so forth, and that potential is being unleashed. In fact, it is the countries associated with the great cities of the world where you do not see the growth. Here are the slowest growing economies. Europe, 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 and finally Europe. So worldwide at least, the growth is not necessarily the urban economies. In fact, that's where the recession persists in many cases. It's actually in the rural economies. We can see this nationally as well. So 4 years and 6 months ago, all 50 states were red, meaning all 50 states were in recession. We're now in our 5th year of economic recovery. The recovery has been in place for 17 quarters. And so no state economy is in recession. This map comes from Moody's Analytics and gives us a hierarchy of economic performance across the 50 U.S. states and the District of Columbia. States in red are in recession. As you can see, no state is in recession. Now, according to Moody's model, there is one state at risk of recession. According to them, it's a state in tan at risk of recession, and that's our neighbor to the east, Delaware. Now, Delaware is known as the first state because Delaware was the first state in the Union to ratify the Constitution. It's basically been downhill for them ever since. And so, this last cycle, they lost 2 major auto manufacturing plants, and when MBNA was acquired by Bank of America, this led to some consolidation. I must tell you, when I look at the Delaware data, I don't see this. I think Delaware is doing just fine, and we'll have a chance to talk about Sussex County and other aspects of economic life. I'm just showing you what Moody'sEconomy.com is suggesting about the economy. The states in blue, including our own fabulous state of Maryland, these are states that are in recovery, meaning what? They're still struggling to get back to pre-recession levels of economic activity. Take unemployment as an example in our state. The state's unemployment rate presently is 7%. When the recession began in December of 2007, our state's unemployment rate was 3.3%. By September of 2008, when the financial crisis really began with the failure of Lehman Brothers on September 15th of that year, our unemployment rate was 4.8%. 1 year after the failure of Lehman Brothers, 8%. And we're just now down to 7%. We are still in recovery. Yes, ma'am?
If you excluded government employees, what would Maryland unemployment be?
I'm going to show you that in the slide. It'll be right there. Now, it's hard to know because if you excluded the government employees, the question is, would they get jobs, would they not get jobs, and so on and so forth. And then where do you stop? Do you stop with the government employees, or do you extend that to defense contractors? Or the government spreads its tentacles throughout the state. But I'll show you evidence of that. And if it doesn't answer your question, please ask it again. So these states are in recovery. Now notice the states that are in expansion. States that have never been bigger economically. These are among the fastest growing state economies in the country, all west of the Mississippi, and all natural resource intensive with significant rural components. Alaska is not a very urbanized state. And a lot of the growth is in West Texas, away from the cities. Oklahoma, Utah, Nebraska, South Dakota, and along the dimension of growth, the fastest growing state economy is none other than